So let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, March 6th, 2025 regular meeting of the Boulder City Council. We're going to get started with a quick announcement, which is about boards and commissions. So applicant interviews for the 2025 boards and commissions have concluded, and recordings are now posted on the city's website. They can be viewed on the boards and commissions interviews page at bouldercolorado.gov/boards-and-commissions-interviews. The public hearing and final appointments will take place at the March 20th regular council meeting. Again, thank you to all that applied. And if you have any questions, please contact the city clerk's office at bouldercolorado.gov or call 303-441-3008. And with that, I will go ahead and call us to order and ask Elisha if you could please do a roll call.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Welcome back and good evening, everyone. We'll start tonight's roll call, as usual, with Councilmember Adams.
Present.
Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts is not here yet. Councilmember Marquis.
Present.
Shuhart.
Here.
Spear.
Present.
Wallach.
Here.
And Weiner. Mayor, we have our quorum.
Very good. Thank you, Elisha. Do note that we do expect Councilmember Folkerts soon, and Councilmember Weiner is sick and unable to attend, is my understanding. All right, we're going to head straight into open comment. So, Elisha, if you can go over our guidelines for public participation, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening again, everyone. And the public participation guidelines are as follows. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and council, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, we ask that you please visit our website at bouldercolorado.gov/services/productive-atmospheres. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Only one person at a time at the podium, unless an accommodation like an interpreter is required. Our remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No standing in or otherwise blocking the aisles. No participant shall stand or hold items such as signs or flags in a manner that would block the view of another person. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. We ask that you not affix items to the podium or dais or walls or other surfaces of the chambers. Signs, flags, and other items used to communicate must be held by one person when displayed. Obscenity, other epithets based on race, gender, or religion, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the meeting will not be tolerated. And lastly, in-person participants are asked to refrain from expressing support or disagreement verbally or with sounds such as applause or snapping, that is, with the exception of declarations. Traditionally, support is shown through American Sign Language applause or jazz hands. Thank you for listening, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for that, Elisha. All right, so we have 12 people in person and 8 people remote. I'm going to call 3 names at a time. 2 minutes will be allowed for each speaker, and I will be strict about those time limits in the interest of fairness. So our first 3 speakers are Trish Emser, Karen Holweg, and Mike Clark.
Good
Just
evening.
before you get started, I'll note holding signs up above your head does obstruct views potentially, so if you could please keep those down, please. They need to be kept down.
Good evening, Council, and thank you. Trish Imser here. I'm here on behalf of Bike Boulder. I believe you all received a file earlier that had some documentation as well as pictures. You'll notice in the stolen bike heat maps that we show the stolen bikes this year. I'd like to call out a couple of minor things. One is in January, more than 50% of the bikes stolen were e-bikes. We've seen that trend since last fall, which is very concerning for our transportation plan as well as fun. In addition, I did a little study of those bikes stolen this year, 41 total so far. 70% of those were valued at over $1,000. And the number recovered for this year, 0. So it's unfortunate that bikes seem to be disappearing, and I hope we can find some solutions to that. I'd also like to remind us that one of the education points that we make at Bike Boulder is there's no single action that's going to reduce this bike theft. It's going to take a combination of techniques, registration, angle grinder resistant locks, better racks in better locations. It's a lot of stuff, but we really look forward to working with you on that. I do have some good news. My jazz hands are starting. Graham Hill is here as well. In coordination with Shared Paths, Bike Boulder is launching the first ever bike valet at the farmers market starting next month on Saturdays. We look forward to all cyclists coming there, and there'll be a lot more information to come, but some great news to share. And in wrapping up, I want to say that our partnership is very important to Bike Boulder. We want to find creative ways to improve conditions so cyclists can confidently secure their bicycles around Boulder. Simply put, cyclists need all of our support in order to bike Boulder. We very much look forward to your feedback on how to improve our shared paths. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Karen Holweg, Mike Clark, and Lauren Clark.
Good evening. I'm Karen Holweg. I live in Boulder. I'm very concerned about approving bonds for the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project tonight because the project lacks a final design and lacks permits from numerous national, state, and local agencies. Comments about the project have been sent to you by 2 nationally recognized science and environmental law organizations that have a significant presence in Colorado. Their letters express concerns about the project design and missing permits. The first letter, from the Center for Biological Diversity, notes that multiple scientific studies specifically address the need for special treatments when unproven habitat restoration and creation strategies, like those proposed, are used to mitigate impacts to federally threatened species and their wetland and riparian habitats. They recognize that flood control is an important priority, especially in an era of climate change. However, they note that protection of threatened species and their critical habitat is equally paramount. And they, quote, urge the city to, at a minimum, wait on any further actions unless and until federal processes have been concluded and resolved. Similarly, the second letter from Save the World's Rivers acknowledged the critical flood protection function of the city, but noted that complying with the federal permitting process is also critical and warned that a project can change dramatically through the permitting process, and these permitting processes can take years. City staff has been assuring us all that the project is moving forward well, but there is no 90% design, the price is rising, and there are still no permits. I urge you to get specific reasons for the project delays and require a 90% design plus a verifiable timeline for getting all the permits before approving the bonds. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mike Clark, Lauren Clark, and Mike Lottie.
My name is Mike Clark. I live here in the city. I've lived here 45 years. I come to you with a problem.
If you can speak into the mic, please.
Sorry, it's a little low. Can I start over? Yes, no? Thank you. My name is Mike Clark. I live here in the city of Boulder. I've been here roughly 45 years. I've come to you today with a problem that's gotten to the point of insanity. we have traffic problems. I'm going to use a situation at Arapahoe and Foothills Parkway. When you're traveling west on Arapahoe and make a left turn onto Foothills so that you're headed south, there's a light. No one obeys that light anymore. It is not one car that misses, that runs the light. It's 3 to 5, and now semis do it. I've been to the city, the police chief, the current and the former. I've talked to the traffic sergeant. I've talked to everybody and asked and said, hey, you know, if you don't stop this, somebody's going to get killed. It's the worst intersection in town. You've lost dozens and dozens of people in that intersection being hurt because we don't enforce the rules. The rules are there. You don't need new ones. But the police tell me that it's council that's holding them back. I don't know. I'm not a political guy. I don't have really the desire to come here. But I am not going to get killed on Arapahoe. This morning, it was a semi that ran it. I was going eastbound, no problem. I had a green light for 3 count, and the guy ran it. And you don't deal with it. The police say it's you, so I'm coming to you. You need to enforce the existing laws. Traffic has to be a priority in this city. You haven't made it. And if you don't, somebody's going to get killed, and I'd be the one to say, I warned them. And there is a litigation issue to that. So you've been warned. Please take care of the problem.
Thank you. Now we have Lauren Clark, Mike Lottie, and Shelley Russell.
All right, my name is Lauren Clark. I'm here to talk to you about pedestrian safety here in Boulder. It's become an area where it's not safe or comfortable to be a walking pedestrian. If you're on the multi-use paths, you have all sorts of characters using drugs on either side. As a solo female, I do not feel safe, and I know others feel that same way. You've got bikes that refuse to yield to pedestrians. As part of your Vision Zero, you include education. We shouldn't have to put signs up that say this, but apparently we need to. And we need enforcement out there. I have never once seen a police officer out to enforce it. You can submit the close call form. Maybe they'll call you in a couple days. I had a bicyclist swerve into my dog and I while walking. And we called, and the ranger said, nope, go ahead, fill out the form. Never heard back. Additionally, e-bikes. We have spent so much money, $250,000 as part of the Vision Zero project for these new bike lanes, yet there are multi-use pathways that run parallel, and the bicyclists prefer that, and they have motors, and nobody seems to care that it says no motorized vehicles. So then, as a pedestrian, you're pushed onto the main thoroughfares, where, as you just heard, they're also not safe. 77% of, this is your own data here, says that pedestrian accidents, specifically walking, are in crosswalks. When was the last time you saw anyone enforce that? Anyone, besides somebody yelling at somebody out their window because the pedestrian was in the right of way? I almost got hit 2 different times last Friday. When I spoke to your police sergeant, I straight up asked, should I be wearing a body camera to walk around Boulder? And they said, you know, it's not a bad idea. That's where we are as a city. We need enforcement. You've got all this money for Vision Zero, and you've spent a lot on engineering. But you can engineer all you want, but if you don't enforce the laws you're engineering around, it means nothing.
Thank you. Now we have Mike Lottie, Shelley Russell, and Rob Smoke.
Hi, my name is Mike Lottie. I live in Boulder. I've lived here for the last 40-something years. And I'm retired. I volunteer quite a bit in some environmental groups, thirdact.org, 350.org, Go Electric Colorado, promoting home electrification. And today I spent at the Boulder Mod Factory, which was great. And I'm very proud to participate in it. It's very cool, and I think it's a great example of how creative and innovative Boulder can be in some of these programs, and I hope it's going to be duplicated in many cities across the country. As well, I realize we're a great leader in environmental issues. So I'm very confused as to why the city of Boulder is not supporting State House Bill 1096, which is encouraging rooftop solar for quicker permit approvals. Um, you know, the technology that's used, it's been used in 300 different jurisdictions, so that's not an issue. It's used in Denver. It's free, so it's not a budget issue. I realize Boulder's good about it. We get our rooftop solar permits approved typically in something like 2 weeks. But the reason is we share the grid. So across the state of Colorado, if we can get more rooftop solar in Fort Lupton or Aurora or wherever it's in the Excel grid, it helps clean our grid that we use. We obviously spent tens of millions of dollars on municipalization. I think it really helped encourage Excel to do what they're doing as far as getting the grid cleaned up quickly. So what I'd like is for you to at least be neutral on this issue. If you don't have to promote it, but to actually spend our dollars against a bill that's encouraging renewable energy.
Your time is up, but thank you for your testimony. Now we have Shelley Russell, Rob Smoke, and Dr. Patty Fuster Aguilera.
Hi, I'm Shelley Russell. Thank you, Council City members and Mayor Brockett, for allowing me to speak tonight to you about illegal campers, specifically in the area between Eben G. Fine Park and 6th Street. This is a very popular area for joggers and cyclists and people like me who just like to walk in nature. And unfortunately, this is also a popular area for illegal campers. And even though Joe and his team do a great job when he gets out there, it's just not enough to deter this illegal activity. And what happens when given time is these tents proliferate into little tent cities. And even though we're reporting it every week, we are then faced with a fire hazard with their propane tanks and health hazard with their abundant amount of trash. But more importantly, it becomes a safety issue because these tent cities can attract a criminal element. And this happened to me when I was walking my dog in the spring of 23 along that area near the Justice Center. I was threatened by a camper in this tent city with a knife. And he was arrested and sent to jail, and it turns out he had a criminal record. And this is why we really need to clamp down on this illegal activity, especially since it's a safe zone for kids area. I had the pleasure recently of running into a county deputy who was surveying the area, and he told me that his jurisdiction was north of the creek path near the Justice Center. And he said to me, this area will always be clear because county stays on top of it. Campers know that they can set up on the south side of the path because that is the city area and city does not manage it. And that's huge. I'll repeat that. People know city does not manage it. And that's really where we need to take control of this situation and maybe get some more police or more tagging. Thank you.
Now we have Rob Smoke, and then I understand that Patty Fuster Aguilera is online, so after that we'll go to Eric Cornell and Susan Hall. Your mic's off. Oh, there you go. You're good. Oh, nope. Turn it back on.
Okay.
There you go.
Am I good? Okay. My name's Rob Smoke. I live in Boulder. I moved here in 86. So I've been to a lot of council meetings. I served on the Human Relations Commission between 2003 and 2008. And I don't know, I feel very disappointed in the kind of decisions I see coming from council. I just want to read a couple things here real quick. And by the way, if you go to my Facebook page, I have a special offer this week. If you follow me on Facebook, I'll send you a smile emoji of your very own, yeah. So anyway, what we are seeing in Gaza is a repeat of Auschwitz, says genocide expert. What Israel is doing in Gaza is simply mass extermination without the gas chamber, says human rights activist and genocide scholar Mong Zarni. Okay, I'll skip ahead. It is no longer possible to deny that Israel is engaged in systematic war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocidal actions. Professor Omer Bartov, former IDF soldier, and he's considered one of the world's leading specialists on the subject of genocide. Also, yes, it is genocide. This is exactly what genocide looks like. That's Amos Goldberg, professor of Holocaust history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he has an article that I have a link to here. Also, a textbook case of genocide, Raz Siegel. He's an Israeli historian residing in the U.S. And the trope, the anti-Semitic trope. Yeah, I'm against anti-Semitism, but who gets to decide? I think that's really a big question here. And what's going on right now in Gaza, it's just completely unacceptable. And our silence doesn't serve us in any way, shape, or form. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we have Eric Cornell, Susan Hall, and Margaret Lecomte.
I'm ready. Council members, I'm Eric Cornell. The problem with using districts to elect our city council is that living next to someone is no guarantee you will share the same vision for Boulder. The beauty of the election method known as proportional representation, or PR, is that it lets voters find their way into their own districts, not geographical districts, but conceptual districts based on shared priorities and vision. How can the city know how you want to see yourself represented on council on the basis of your neighborhood or your ethnicity, race, age, wealth, gender, or your opinions about parking or prairie dogs? Answer is the city doesn't have to. With PR voting, if a sufficiently large segment of the voters identify the quality by which they want to be represented on council, then they rank only those sorts of candidates at the top of their ballot and they will have their representation on council. And listen, if it turns out that your highest priority and enough of your like-minded voters is having a council member who lives nearby, then yes, you can have one. If it turns out that's not what voters care about the most, then there's really no loss in not having elections by district. I grew up in the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, a city the same size as Boulder, reputation for good government. They have 8 decades experience running city council elections by PR without major problems. Yes, the city has its share of math professors, but on the street where I lived, it was mostly working class people. I never met anyone who found it confusing to vote a PR ballot. The one complaint I've heard about the Cambridge system is that it results in all kinds of people getting elected to council, and I can assure you that this charge is entirely correct. All kinds of people get elected. If you find that prospect objectionable, then you definitely should not schedule a study session or working group on proportional representation. But if you are okay with our council reflecting the diversity of our citizens, then I urge that you do look into PR. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Now we have Susan Hall, Margaret Lecomte, and Elliot Flodden.
Well, I am glad that you mentioned all kinds of people, because I would really like to see a declaration on that includes both Muslim and Jewish communities. I think that would be really good. So I'll start with that, and then I'll go on to my name is Susan Hall, of course, as you already introduced me. My daughter did attend high school here in Boulder, but I heard last week that Governor Polis said there will be a $50 million less budget in Colorado, and I wondered if this had to do with sending 3 countries $100 billion. Those 3 countries included Israel. We paid for all their health care. We paid for 15,000 bombs, numerous guns, and what did that get us? Basically a genocide. Now I find out that the financial minister has said, well, we could starve all those people in Gaza, but would the world really let us do that? Well, I'm here because even though I can't stop it, I can at least speak up. And I hope that you guys would speak up too and say that you're not for the war crime of starving a whole population. Also, there's another war crime that's been committed there, and that's that they had, and you can see it on film if you go on almost any YouTube, including Gray Zone. where in the West Bank, they had people come out of their houses, line up single file all the way down the street, and just march down the street at gunpoint. Now, where in the world would we want that? And it's being done with our money, my money. So I felt like I should at least speak up. I know Anne Frank, Corey Tinboom, those people were hidden out. But I have not heard of one Palestinian that's been protected.
Thank you. Our last two in-person speakers are Margaret LeCompte and Elliot Flayden.
Good evening. I'm Margaret LeCompte. I live near the South Boulder Creek project, and I'm a retired professor from CU Boulder. I'm speaking against the emergency declaration as proposed for this project. It's not an emergency. The flood happened 11 years ago. Planning for the dam is ongoing since at least 2019. What is needed for approval for the project has been known for years. Why the rush right now? The city says that the first day for the second quarter 2025 is a hard date for the city to approve the project, but no city staff member has provided a convincing reason why this date is hard. Such an assertion does not constitute an emergency. The city's not ready to proceed to a bond issue. The city's failure to have a workable plan for this project does not constitute an emergency. The city has not released a 90% design for the project. It has applied for none of the permits required for the project approval. Its cost estimates are now more than 5 years old and don't include many of the crucial components now required by project design. No alternatives to the dam have ever been seriously considered. Despite the fact that since 2001, 20 or so cheaper, faster, less environmentally disastrous, but effective alternatives have been put forward. The project costs too much for too little benefit. This is the single most expensive project ever undertaken by the city. $66 million and counting, all to protect 600 units by the city's own account. Every single Boulder resident or business that pays city stormwater fees will be charged for it. Declaring this to be an emergency is a cynical way to avoid public input and a vote on a project that seriously needs both. It's inappropriate to be on the consent agenda. If there's an emergency at all, it's the city council's refusal to accept it's making
Your
a
time is up,
terrible
but thank you
mistake.
for your testimony. Our last in-person speaker is Elliot Flayden, and then we'll go to RJ Boyle online.
There is no racial group that suffers more discrimination in this country than the Jew. If you don't believe me, pull the FBI hate crime statistics. In spite of this background, in the fall of 23, a member of this council put up statements on social media that were at least inflammatory, if not racially discriminatory, about the Jew. Yes, she apologized, but then in the fall of 24 walked this apology back. When a community member, Aaron Brooks, brought this issue up to city council at the December meeting, I decided to support him by attending that meeting. And then I was surprised to see on these monitors above racial discrimination against my family. I saw private pictures of my kids with Governor Polis, not in isolation, but as purported evidence of a conspiracy theory. The false accusation that I am an Israeli agent or on Governor Polis's payroll, neither of which are true. This council at that meeting did not criticize those racists who spread that conspiracy theory about my family, nor did this council choose to criticize the other council member who walked back an apology about inflammatory statements about the Jew. Instead, this council reserved its ire and condemnation for the one community member that brought these issues of racism against the Jew to the council's attention. Yes, in subsequent meetings, this council may have issued cliched statements against anti-Semitism. But when factored against what has gone on at these meetings in the past year and a half, those statements mean nothing. When members of the city are routinely criticizing Jews, making racial epithets against Jews, when city council members are making inflammatory statements against the Jew, the city's claimed caring about inclusion is meaningless, because what the city seems to care about instead is sweeping racism against the Jew under the rug. I would say thank you, but I am just disappointed.
Okay. We're going to move on to our online testifiers. Our first three are RJ Boyle, Emily Reynolds, and Rachel Friend.
Mayor, I do not see RJ online tonight.
We'll go to Emily Reynolds then.
Good evening, Council and City Manager. I'd like to comment on the impressive lack of reasonable feedback opportunities on the Boulder Comprehensive Plan. I thought the Community Assembly would be a chance after the laughable theater production where people could not voice any productive discussion of the comp plan because the theater people needed to act everything out, a 2-hour fiasco. It was more than obvious that the Indigenous people who were paid to be there felt both unheard and, as they themselves said, mocked by the orchestrated setting. Was that the objective? It clearly wasn't to hear what citizens thought about the comp plan. I thought that was the pinnacle of absurdity until I heard the details of the so-called community assembly. First of all, you and I and most of us are not invited to attend. It's not a community assembly after all. Apparently, 10,000 flyers went out to prospective attendees. And if you are among the anointed, then you have the chance to possibly attend 7 hours of sessions over 7 weeks to talk about this, what the city apparently finds important, 15-minute neighborhoods. No talking about what you want to discuss. No. Council priorities only, please. Rainbows and unicorns for all. I'd love to see some actual discussion of the comp plan, but I guess that's not permitted. It's almost like the council majority really doesn't want to hear from us.
Thank you. We'll now go on to Rachel Friend and then Micah Parkin and Lynn Siegel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Friend. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nobody's. Smile, guys. Special hi to Elisha. I'm here on agenda item 3E in support of ordinance 8690 on stormwater and flood bonds. I've been involved in the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation efforts for 10 years. This is 2015 to 2025 now, and the city has been working on it for a lot more years before that. The project has always been about protecting lives and property and doing so in a way that maximally safe keeps impacted habitats. And I've been watching council and on council for a while. So I've been watching closely. I've never seen a project more thoroughly vetted and under more years of scrutiny than we did on this project. So City Council, Planning Board, OSBT, and RAB were all heavily involved for years looking at this. We had 2 ballot measures voted on by the community directly on this issue, and that's on top of countless studies and restudies and special work groups and consultants, extra community engagement. We looked at a flood mitigation issue from every possible angle. So I just wanted to be here tonight to encourage you all to pass this as an emergency measure on consent, which is in keeping with standard protocol for these kind of bond votes. And I also wanted to thank you for your continued support, and especially to our staff. Our staff members are competent and thorough and professional. I have huge faith in Joe and Brandon and the team and the processes that they are following, and I'm confident that they are dotting their I's and crossing their T's, and that the timing of the permitting and bonds is appropriate. And I also just want to thank staff extra for sticking with our community even when it's hard. And I know that this has been hard. So thank you all, and keep up the great work. It's good to see you all.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to Micah Parkin, Lynn Siegel, and Jim Hayes.
Hi, City Council members and Mayor. I'm Micah Parkin, Executive Director of 350 Colorado and a 350 Boulder County Team Leadership Council member. We have over 3,500 members locally who are deeply concerned about the climate crisis and promote a fast, fair transition off fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. I'm so proud of our city's climate commitments and action, and thank you for your leadership in this critical work. I'm speaking today to urge your support for an important bill moving at the state capitol that would help speed the transition to renewables. HB 251096, the Automated Permits for Clean Energy Technology. This bill makes getting a permit for home solar installations faster and easier, and requires cities, counties, and the state to make available an automated online software platform for approving residential solar and battery permits. This bill is important because it cuts red tape, speeds up solar permitting, reduces expenses, delays, cancellations, saves resources at permitting offices, and supports our climate goals. Tomorrow, we host our 10th annual Climate Lobby Day at the state capitol with over 200 participants, and this is one of the bills we're advocating for. But unfortunately, I've heard from bill proponents that spokespeople for the city of Boulder are blocking this bill to retain local control of solar permitting. Now, while our city may have good and fairly quick permitting processes for solar installations, this is not the case for the rest of the state, and we should be doing all we can to promote a more rapid transition to renewables statewide. Local regs can be automated to the extent needed for historic areas, and solar companies already have to ensure that they install on permitted structures. We're in a climate crisis that's already causing worsening wildfires and climate disasters here and worldwide, and we must take bold action for greater good. Our state, nation, and world's not on track to meet climate goals, and every 10th of a degree temperature rise we can prevent will protect lives and prevent suffering. Future generations would undoubtedly tell us to get serious about speeding up the transition to renewables and not block a bill to support solar transition statewide. Let's continue to be climate leaders. Please support automated permits for solar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now we have Lynn Siegel, Jim Hayes, and Eric Gross.
How fortunate that we have captions. I'm at a JCC talk on the Holocaust. Elliot, just chill, you know? This is ridiculous. I'm a Jew. I'm here at, this Holocaust talk, and I support the Palestinians. And this is definitely a genocide. And your kids' pictures, big
All right, if we
deal.
could not call out other community members, please.
The kids' photographs are not obscene. We need back our PowerPoints. This is utterly, utterly ridiculous. I heard someone talking about solar rooftop, a bill, and the last person talked about permitting process going faster. Well, in the county, I was discouraged from putting solar on, from my energy retrofit and being sequestered from it because of a solar director with the county forcing a vendor to put in a solar installation under adverse conditions. And I called it out, and I got gaslighted as a result on my retrofit. And they did everything, they completely botched everything. Set me back 20 years on attempting to get solar so that I can get geothermal heat pump. I was very impressed to find that a house in the county out in the mountains is doing geothermal, a Scott Rodwin. I'm opposed to CU South entirely, not just the flooding. We do not need that. 37,000 people added to our population of 107. No way. This has got to stop. Impact fees, wealth equity. That's what will improve the world and make it so we don't have to be at war.
Your time's up, but thank you for your testimony. All right, now we have Jim Hayes, Eric Gross, and Sam Weaver.
Mayor, I do not see Jim online tonight.
All right, let's go to Eric Gross then.
Hello, Council. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to talk about, but I had a feeling that some of the other speakers here would really open up the floor, and they did. So, sorry, I've been actually dealing with a lot today. But in just the last couple days, I just want to, in respect to someone who was talking about the most. Oh, now I can't find it on my phone. The most prejudicially attacked group in the country being the Jew, which I find an offensive way to describe me. No one's ever called me the Jew before, and I think that's really disgusting. And I don't know how someone can speak in that manner. I also agree that the anti-Semitism resolution that this council put forward was fine, although it seemed to be in response to false accusations of anti-Semitism that have been running rampant around the country, including a college in New York in which their governor just forced the college to remove a job listing for related to Palestinian studies because it said that the course and the job would include discussions of things like occupation and apartheid. So we are actually witnessing the total silencing of speech around an issue because of lobbying efforts based on falsehoods. I have not, in the dozen or so
Your
times
time
I've
is up,
attended.
but thanks for your testimony. Our final two speakers are Sam Weaver and Patty Fuster Aguilera.
Sam, your mic is open if you'd like to begin speaking.
Who's up, Sam?
Yes, you're up, Sam.
Oh, sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for taking my testimony and for your community service. When I first came on the council in November of 2013, the 1,000-year flood from that September was still an overwhelming topic of community concern. Sewer systems were threatened with catastrophe and badly damaged. Water supplies were contaminated and delivery was threatened. FEMA funding was being negotiated, and for many, a years-long recovery was just beginning. Boulder was reminded that our status as the highest flood risk community in Colorado is not an academic proposition, it is an undeniable fact of life. One of the projects that came to fruition a few years later was a Wonderland Creek flood control project. In 2013 flood, homes in the Noble Park and Kings Ridge area had been hit hard by flood damage. The previously planned Wonderland Creek flood control project started construction right after the flood and finished in 2019. When the next big rains came in 2021 and 2023, that neighborhood experienced notably fewer impacts. That is a success story plus much more that could be accomplished on South Boulder Creek at CU South with your continued support moving forward. Some have questioned the use of emergency status to pass the bond measure at hand, but I would emphasize that during the flood, it sure felt like 4 days of an emergency. You have heard all the dry financial reasons why this pathway is the best practice to bond, but I'll add to that pragmatism that when the flood threat manifests, it is the definition of an emergency. The sooner we prepare, the better we face that unavoidable moment. Voters have twice supported this path by 8 and 14-point ballot margins in 2021 and 2022, so the public wants to see flood protection move ahead quickly. I ask for your enthusiastic yes vote regarding consent agenda item 3E, bonding for flood protection. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right, our final speaker is Patty Fuster Aguilera.
Hello, my name is Dr. Patty Fuster Aguilera. I've been coming to these meetings for more than a year, and I have seen you reducing the freedom of speech for those who have been advocating for the lives of Palestinians. Remember, Israel has been genociding Palestinians since 1948. It seems that now that Trump is in power, people are starting to realize that the politics in this country are pure fascism. But that started way before Trump, and the members of this council have enacted it at least throughout the past year. You are all complicit on the genocide of the Palestinians, not only for not speaking up when you have the voice to do so, not only for silencing our voices and victimizing yourselves by claiming you don't feel safe, but also by allowing this city to invest and make monetary profit from this genocide. Divest now from Caterpillar and Microsoft as the city and as individuals, because some of you do invest on those. Boulder has a responsibility with its sister city, Nablus. Don't you hear the daily attacks by settlers in the West Bank? Just today in Kosher and Nablus, the IOF shot a 9-year-old girl in the head. The West Bank is now a war zone. In the meantime, Israel is blocking humanitarian aid in Gaza once again, and you're not doing anything. If you don't stand up with those most vulnerable, there will be a time when it will be you. It will be your kids. It will be your family. It's just a matter of time because this is how fascism works. Members of this city council are stopping an anti-Muslim declaration when a Muslim ban is going to be enacted in less than a week by the federal government. Where is your support for the Muslim community? You failed them too. You should have started speaking up more than a year ago. You should have done a ceasefire resolution more than a year ago. Remember, Palestinian freedom also means your freedom. Every day that goes by without you publicly speaking is another step on your own freedom. If you do it for them, do it for
Your
yourself.
time is up, and thanks for joining us tonight. All right, that brings us to the end of our speakers. Thank you to people for coming and talking to us tonight. I'm going to turn to city staff for any responses.
Nothing from me tonight.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Right. And I guess if council wants to ask a clarifying question or two of staff, we can do that. I've got one, but Nicole, you go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for everybody coming out tonight. My question was around the folks who were saying that council is not allowing the police to enforce or to do traffic enforcement, and I was just wondering, that seems very operational, so I was wondering what council has to do with traffic enforcement and just enforcement of city laws in general. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, and you're correct that traffic enforcement is an operational action that is underneath the purview of the city manager and the police chief. And I do know that actually we have just recently placed a red light camera at the intersection of Foothills and Arapahoe based on some of the concerns of behavior of red light running at that intersection.
But just to follow up, there's nothing that the council has said or done that would impede traffic enforcement there or anywhere else?
No.
Correct. Thanks for clarifying.
Yep.
Taisha, did you have a follow-up question? Yeah, just from open comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just had a question about the bike theft component and just was curious, do we have a council agenda on item coming up on just the bike component of transportation at all?
I will look forward and see. I'm just kind of trying to think through what's on the agenda. I don't think we do, but I do know we have some of that dashboard material out that we'd be happy to get you a link to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
And I would ask about the bonds, but we're about to consider that on the consent agenda, so
Yep.
I'll wait for that. Okay, great. So that we will move on now to our consent agenda, please, Elisha.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our consent agenda is item number 3 on tonight's agenda, and it consists of items 3A through 3F.
Thanks for that. So following up to what I was just saying, I just wonder, we've had some people testify about the bonds under Ordinance 8690. Joe Tadeuccia, our utilities director, I know you've sent some information out over hotline about the need for the emergency passage. I just wonder if you might give a real quick summary about this next step we're taking and why we're doing it. No. Now it is.
How about now? Perfect. Good evening, council members. I'm Joe Tadeuccia. I'm the director of the Utilities Department. Tonight, council is being asked to authorize commencement of the bond process. We appreciate the continued community interest in the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project and also appreciated council member Wallach's hotline questions. I provided a response to that yesterday, and I'll just maybe summarize some of the highlights of the situation. Starting with the financials. There have been questions about the status of the contract documents and the construction estimate. Those are sufficiently developed and have had several iterations to be appropriate to start the bond process. It's really important to note that the funds have to be appropriated in order for us to sign a construction contract. And so the authorization that's before you tonight will pave the way for that. Also, some very fair questions about how we manage the risk on these large capital projects. In an environment when costs can go up for any number of circumstances. And we have, as I mentioned in the hotline response, we've been building reserves for this for several years. We also have a 15% contingency line item that isn't assigned to anything, and it's there. If something changes, we can apply that to a change order. We can also move projects around within the future 6-year capital improvement program, and we do that from time to time to manage just the costs and the changes on projects. So financially, I feel strongly that we're in the right place to be taking this bond step. Speaking to the emergency ordinance, I know that council has received a lot of questions about the emergency designation. And doing bonds by emergency ordinance is how we do all of our bonds. I want to be really clear that it's not unique to the South Boulder Creek flood project. And here's why. A normal ordinance involves 2 council meetings, so you have the meetings and the time between, and then there's a 30-day public notice period before we can take any action on them. And that adds a lot of time to the process. And when we get to this step, we're usually ready to move forward, and we're ready to start the bid process like we are on the South Boulder Creek project. When you approve an emergency ordinance, it goes into effect immediately. So that allows us to get started. And as the schedule stands with the staff team that's working on this, we will be kicking off the bidding process and having pre-bid meetings within the next few weeks. And as I noted in my hotline response, one of the first questions they'll ask is the status of the funding. And it's important to assure them that this is a legitimate project, that we have those funds in place. So your authorization tonight will help with that. There have been a number of comments about the project status here tonight, and that I know have come to council by email, and some statements made that the permitting process has not started at all yet, which is not accurate at all. We are well underway and have a lot of agencies and approvals that we need. And for these large capital projects, we have multiple work streams that are all taking place at the same time. There's design, there's a funding element and working towards that. There's bidding, project approvals, landowner agreements. We work on all of those things concurrently and try and bring them to closure at the same time. And for projects like that, that allows it to start as soon as possible. And so with the critical life safety element that is there on the South Boulder Creek flood project, that's what's entailed in the authorization that's before you tonight. Happy to answer any further questions.
Thanks so much, Joe. That was really helpful for framing for everyone. Any other questions for Joe or on anything else on the consent agenda? Or perhaps a motion?
I make a motion to pass the consent agenda as is.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. A roll call, please, Elisha.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll start tonight's roll call for the consent agenda items 3A through 3F with Councilmember Shuhart.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Wallach.
Aye.
Adams.
Yes.
Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts.
Yes.
And Councilwoman Marquis.
Yes.
The consent agenda items 3A through 3F are hereby approved with a vote of 8-0.
Thanks very much. All right, moving right along then, if we can look at our call-up check-in, please.
Yes, sir. Our call-up check-ins are item number 4 on tonight's agenda. 4A is the consideration of Left-Hand Water District's request for comment regarding a water tap for a property in Area 3 of the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. The address is 4473 North 51st Street.
Any interest from council in calling this one up? Not seeing any. So that'll be no on that one, and we can move to our public hearing, please.
Yes, sir. Our public hearings are item number 5 on tonight's agenda. 5A is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8651, amending Title I, General Administration, Title IV, Licenses and Permits, Title V, General Offices, Title IX, Land Use Code, and Title X, Structures, BRC 1981, to update residential occupancy standards to ensure conformance with Colorado House Bill 24-007 concerning residential occupancy limits and setting forth those related details.
And with that, I'm happy to introduce a familiar face here on the dais, Carl Geiler from Planning and Development Services. Carl, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, Council. I'm Carl Geiler from Planning and Development Services. Before the Council tonight is Ordinance 8651, which relates to updating our occupancy standards to conform with recent state law. So this is similar to the ordinance that came before Council last month relative to accessory dwelling units, where we're updating the code to conform to state law. So the purpose of tonight is for City Council to make a decision on the ordinance. This slide might be familiar to council since we've been discussing occupancy for a number of years. We were talking about this back in August of 2023, where we talked about how occupancy is regulated in the city of Boulder. Similar to other jurisdictions, it limits the number of people that can live within dwelling units. Up until this year, the city of Boulder has been enforcing 2 occupancy codes, one being a life and safety or building code, which is through the International Property Maintenance Code, which I'll talk about tonight, but also the zoning code or the land use code. Land use codes or zoning codes typically limit the number of unrelated people per unit. Doesn't limit the number of family members, but does relate to unrelated. So council will recall that we brought forward an ordinance back in 2023 to change that number. So being that it currently in the code is based on family, we have a pretty broad definition of family. So it's pretty loose as far as who can live in the unit by relation, but again, it is an occupancy limit that's based on the number of unrelated that caps that number. So after we made the change in 2023, which basically went from 3 or 4 unrelated per unit up to 5, the state passed a House bill in 2024, which is 1007, that basically prohibited residential occupancy limits that are based on the number of unrelated persons per unit. The bill is actually pretty straightforward. It's only like a couple pages. It basically says that jurisdictions have to cease enforcement of occupancy standards that are based on unrelated persons per unit on July 1st of 2024. And that's what the city of Boulder has done. So instead of that, we're implementing what we have been implementing for years, the International Property Maintenance Code for occupancy based on life and safety. The law says that you can limit occupancy based on any demonstrated health or safety standards. So a number of different kind of codes like building codes, fire codes, as I've listed on the slide. So that's what the International Property Maintenance Code is. So the ordinance before you tonight does a number of things. It's meant to remove any inconsistencies with state law that might create confusion or ambiguity to the public or property owners. That's why staff is recommending that council adopt the ordinance. It removes all references to residential occupancy that are based on unrelated, and then it changes it changes those references to existing standards that we already have in our Boulder Revised Code, which is Chapter 10.2, which is the Property Maintenance Code, which actually references the International Property Maintenance Code. So again, codes that have been implemented here for years. Because it's moving from the Land Use Code to the Building Code, we're taking the enforcement provisions that were in Title 9, the Land Use Code, and moving that into Title 10 structures. Council's probably also aware of the cooperative housing license, which was permitted a number of years back. This was a license that basically was a special ask that people could ask to go over those occupancy limits in a unit with special approval. Well, with this state law, co-ops are largely irrelevant, so we're removing that from the code entirely. Also based on the state law, any prior approvals that might have restricted occupancy through a special approval, like a use review or a site review, this makes that null and void. There's a number of residential uses that kind of straddle the line between a typical household unit and a group living situation. So we had to kind of weave the needle to make sure that it would comply with state law relative to these group living facilities. So we have updated the intensity standards as it relates to these units like residential care facilities, congregate care, just to kind of have a rough equivalent that's not based on occupancy, but just a general intensity. The other thing the council would notice is that a lot of references that we've been saying through the years, single family and multifamily, at the state level and in a number of other bills and ordinances, those terms have been evolving into detached dwelling units and multi-units rather than using the term family. So that's partly why the ordinance that's attached to the memo is so lengthy, because we had to go through the entire Boulder Revised Code and change all those references. So I'm going to just jump into some of the differences between where we were and where we're headed as far as the International Property Maintenance Code. Just give a couple examples so it's really clear. Like I said, before this year, the city implemented the IPMC, the International Property Maintenance Code, its requirements for all occupants, irrespective of whether they're related or not. And then we had the maximum zoning requirements that were based on unrelated, that were 3 or 4, and then moved up to 5. The IPMC is a little different. Instead of it just being a numeric cap on the unit, it looks at 3 different things to determine how many people can be in the unit, again, for life safety standards. So we have to look at the minimum size of a bedroom being 70 square feet. If you have 2 occupants in that bedroom, you have to have 50 square feet per occupant. So if you have 2 people in that room, it's got to be at least 100 square feet. And then once you figure out, based on bedrooms, the total number of occupants in that unit, you also have to meet living and dining room standards based on this table that I have up on the screen. So if, for instance, those requirements aren't met, that'll actually knock the occupancy down. So there are guardrails with the IPMC. It's not, there are a number of things that have to be looked at. So I just wanted to give 3 different scenarios to kind of paint the picture of what the difference looks like. So the left side is kind of before this year, and then the right side is where we'd be heading. In most cases, zoning throughout the country is going to be more restrictive than the IPMC. That's why a lot of jurisdictions have been getting rid of these types of requirements. Some of them are rooted in, discrimination. So it's just, there's a lot of jurisdictions that have been moving forward with these types of changes. That's what prompted the state to make these changes. So in 2023, for instance, we had a 5 per unit, irrespective of the size or number of bedrooms. If you want by bedrooms and living and dining spaces, that in this particular scenario would jump up to 7 occupants. So again, in most cases, we're probably going to see more people possible in these units allowed through the IPMC. And again, some of this is, aligns with goals of trying to give more housing options for folks within the city to address the housing costs. But scenario B just shows an instance where the IPMC might actually end up being more restrictive than the 5. For instance, if there are, it might be 5 per the zoning, but in the IPMC, if the bedrooms are quite small, that could bump that number down to 4. And then in another scenario, like looking at the first scenario where it jumps up to 7, if the dining room doesn't meet the square footage size, that can bump it back down a category, back down to 5. So just showing that these are the kind of scenarios we expect to see. So because this was a state law, our engagement has largely been in form. We did have extensive engagement on this topic in 2023 that the council recall. We've provided some links to that. We've been giving updates in our PNDS newsletter about these changes along with the ADU changes. We also recorded a video online that talks about all the state bills and what changes staff has been working on. We've been getting emails as staff in support of the changes, along with some that are against the changes. There are a lot of concerns coming from some of the neighborhoods about, especially in the University Hill and Martin Acres neighborhood, where you have some nonconformities, you have some congestion. We've heard from folks talking about shadow dorms, which is basically like developers coming in and adding bedrooms into buildings, either legally or illegally, to take advantage of some of the changes. So we've been responding to that. We have heard from some folks with concerns that investment companies are already starting to buy up properties. So we just wanted to convey that concern to council. So based on, again, the reason that we want to remove any ambiguity between city code and state law, we are recommending that council move forward with ordinance 8651. We brought this ordinance to Planning Board as well as Housing Advisory Board. Both boards have unanimously recommended that City Council adopt the ordinance. So that concludes my presentation. The motion is up on the slide. Happy to answer any questions, and I'll just conclude with the key issue if there's any changes that council wanted to make.
Thanks for that, Carl. Any questions for city staff? Tina.
Hi, thank you so much for the overview. So my first question is, when we're issuing a rental license, will we be asking the person to confirm the size of the rooms now that our criteria has changed? Are we going to make sure that the people who are renting rooms are complying with this new criteria?
To my knowledge, we are not. We used to previously, because the number was simple and not based on the physical configuration of the unit, we could just put 5 on there. Because this is a lot more complicated, we just have a reference to the IPMC. So this is largely something that, if there's a complaint or some sort of enforcement issue, then we would have to, like, the property owner or landlord would have to demonstrate with floor plans, things of that nature, that they're meeting the occupancy standard.
And so if someone's getting a new rental license, would they then do it? If they were converting a single family home in Uni Hill to a rental for students, would they then have to?
And again, I don't think in any of those scenarios would the city require a floor plan demonstrate.
Or just an attestation, for instance, that
it's basically it's on the license that they're agreeing to comply with the IPMC.
Okay.
I'm happy to elaborate too. Brad Mueller, Director of Planning and Development Services. This question goes back actually decades of whether it's practical to calculate the building code occupancy for structures. And while it's done at the time of construction, expecting people to give accurate information about that after the fact turns out to be both a hardship for the property owners and an administrative challenge. As Carl represented, it is more permissive, so we don't anticipate that there'll be a value in having that information up front. But as we've always done, we'll enforce when there are suspicions of violations, and then we start to get into those nuts and bolts kind of questions, which again can take quite a bit of effort on everybody's part. And when you consider the tens of thousands of units that are licensed, that turns into a pretty big task.
Can I ask, and then what is the fine if someone adds a room without going through the process through the city?
I believe you all know Jen Ross, who is our manager of code compliance. She can give you some examples.
Are you asking about building without a permit?
Yeah, and in this case, they're talking about adding a room without going to the city.
So that would be the first fine is $100, the second is $3, and then the third is going to be 1,000, and it's called a civil penalty, and we go up to 5 civil penalties, and then we would issue a criminal summons for that activity if they don't get a permit to either legally establish that room or remove that room with a permit.
And is that similar to other cities?
You know, I don't pay too much attention to what other people are issuing as far as civil penalties. I do know that we haven't updated our civil penalties in a little bit, and we're starting to beginning this year. So I'll be
My
bringing
understanding
more
we
of
are gonna-
that to
yeah.
you guys later this year a little bit. We did ask for an up in our International Property Maintenance Code, which is the IPMC. The beginning civil penalty did go up beginning this year.
Okay, and then the square foot recommendations in the IMPC, those are based on recommendations for the health of the inhabitant of
The
the room.
minimum safe standards for a person to inhabit a space, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I got 3 people queued up, Lauren, and then Matt, and then Mark.
Given that verifying the occupancy, depending on the kind of house it is or the age when it was built, those kinds of things, could be somewhat onerous. Do we have any threshold in terms of what we would require to verify a complaint or something like that before we might ask a property owner to go through this, somewhat onerous process? Just to ensure that people can't, harass their neighbors by having an unfounded complaint in this kind of category.
Unfortunately, the only way to verify compliance or non-compliance is actually to act on the complaint. So we treat each complaint as though it was put forward in good faith. We do occasionally have folks who like to report on their neighbors quite a bit, and but we do try to approach it as even-keeled as we possibly can, and with forethought to the person. If we've already been there 3 times that month for other things, we say, hi, sorry to bother you again. We're here again, but we understand this could be coming from something else. We do have tracking software that we're starting to implement this year to sort of look at complaints and how they're placed, and if it was a verified complaint for the property or not a verified complaint for the property. So that really is a tool that we're going to try to use to really take things with a grain of salt, so to speak, when we go to enforce upon a property in the future.
Do you know if that's, probably not, but do you know if that's something other cities do in terms of having, trying to have different thresholds for maybe if out there someone is making a lot of unverified complaints or something like that?
So that's more, the police department would look at something more for maybe harassment, rather than the code enforcement units or code compliance units that work within the city. We don't really broach that subject. And for the second part of your previous question, also, we've already been verifying with the IPMC when we've had occupancy complaints before, to make sure not only are they meeting our zoning requirements that we had previously, but they're meeting the minimum safety standards. So we're kind of used to doing it. And we kind of switched our gears last year, and we stopped enforcing when we knew the zoning ordinance was going to be coming through. And we started really just zoning in on, no pun intended, our IPMC verifications of properties, including actually taking plans that were drawn up by, some rental companies, and verifying that their measurements were actually correct, and taking out non-habitable space for, the floor measurements and things like that, to make sure that we're not only training our newer officers to be able to do that out in the field and verify occupancy, but that we were understanding how people were submitting their verifiable floor space for occupancy. So we're already sort of, we were already sort of doing it anyway. in preparation for this. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Hey, Jen, good to see you.
Hey.
So Lauren touched on most of my question, but I guess I just wanted to really drill down onto the harassment piece of. So if there's software that you're rolling out, I take it you'd be able to sort of know if there's sort of repeated, unsubstantiated complaints towards a property, and you'd kind of know that in that process. Is that correct?
We do, and we can, and we have long memories as code enforcement officers. We remember properties that keep getting complaints or persons that are placing a lot of property complaints. But again, we take every complaint seriously, and so we never want to err on the side of, you know, oh, this person reports people all the time, and maybe it's going to be, as Brad learned this week, something we call a nothing burger. But we don't want to miss something. We don't want somebody to say, I stayed in an Airbnb and it had, you know, no functioning carbon monoxide alarms. I'd rather go and look than not go and look. So that's kind of where we err, on the side of caution.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I know that maybe
Yeah.
the. Oh, did you want to fill
Yeah,
in?
let me elaborate. Jen's being a little bit modest on things. So while we, in finding the balance, that we obviously do have a fiduciary responsibility to respond to any complaints, but as noted, we know when they're kind of repeat folks, and they do very much take a humane approach to the folks who are getting reported on, and acknowledge that there may be a person. And I've been pulled into conversations where we needed to talk to a frequent complainer and help them understand, yes, that's their right to do it, but they are very savvy as officers to understand when the system's potentially being abused in that way. So we do have a number of attempts. I think Jen is just being very careful to say, too, that we've got a responsibility to acknowledge any complaints that come in.
Yeah, I mean, I would never question the need to actually follow through with every complaint, because that is the right thing to do. I guess my biggest question just centers on, it's probably not Jen or your department when there is maybe an issue of harassment, and I'm just wondering, that goes to PD. But is there a current process in which you flag, you're like, yep, this has been a problem, I know that you want to sort of work it out among yourselves, but do we have a way to say refer that to PD rather than waiting for the tenant to file a form or complaint so that it gets elevated and then that behavior is ended? And so I appreciate your attempts to try to handle that, but I'm wondering if we need a formal process for that to be escalated should the situation demand it.
So it wouldn't be appropriate for the city to file a police complaint on behalf of someone else. The affected person or victim is the person who needs to file a police complaint.
And one other clarification, like,
Sorry,
this
go ahead.
is a-
Sorry, go ahead.
Brad Mueller again. One clarification: that the instances of this happening are very, very rare too. So, you know, process is probably you know, an overstatement of need. I mean, when there's a need, we address it. Yeah.
Okay.
Every couple years, for example.
Yeah, I think our city attorney just shut my inquiry down pretty lickety split. So, but I appreciate that. But anyway, I appreciate your candor and quickness on that, Teresa.
All right.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Brad.
I got Mark and then Taisha.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. How do you analyze the complaint? If I come up to you and say, I know they've got 65-foot bedrooms in there, isn't it appropriate to say, well, how would you know? You know, have you been in there? Have you measured? I mean, is there some standard that you use to assess the validity of a complaint?
We ask follow-up questions. If you've ever been on the receipt of one of my email follow-ups to a customer, I say, thank you for your complaint, and how did you come by this knowledge, and here are my follow-up questions, and I send a list of bullet point questions, like addressing each point in their complaint and trying to kind of suss out how they came upon that knowledge. We have all kinds of ways that people do that. People surf the internet, they look through Airbnb ads, they look through for rent. They look through for sale. Then they send me a copy of the for sale and they go, look, this had 3 bedrooms last year, now it has 5. So we get it all kinds of ways, and we do our due diligence too. And we use those tools available online to also do our due diligence and research prior to making any contact out at the property.
All right, and let me just look at it from the other end, where you do find a violation. When you say it's $100 going up to $1,000, is that for separate complaints, or is that based on whether the landlord complies and fixes the problem?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, because $100 is somewhere between 3 and 5% of what you can charge for a room, and that's. I'm wondering how much of a deterrent that might be.
Sometimes it's not a very good deterrent right off the bat, and we need to have some more conversation with that person before we hit him with the second. But usually once we get to the third one, it starts to drill home the idea that we're actually serious and please do this. And we, at the issuance of that third one, we're very clear to say there's a summons that's coming towards the end of this process where we are going to take you to court for something much more serious. Okay. And so we're very verbal, we're very communicative of our intent and our needs. And so we don't need to be overly punitive on the front end, especially because some people are just not aware of code requirements, and maybe they are just not understanding that they need to act on this. And I would rather err on a little bit less on the front end, more conversation, unless it's a pure safety, like this is going to burn down, and then we move to unsafe structures rather than,
Okay.
So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, we got Taisha, and then maybe we'll get to the public hearing.
Okay. I will be brief. I'm doubling down on how we can better address enforcement, especially for folks who are falsely reporting. And although I understand and I respect our attorney's response, the individual does have that, but there is something about a system that allows false reporting, and we know about it. We also have responsibility in that, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm excited to hear more as the tracking of the violators, and to even understand what would the threshold be, right? If it's 3 times or 5 times, but there needs to be consequences when there are repeaters of because they're wasting our time and our money. So that's the other side of that coin. I'm not, this is more of a comment at this point, because we don't even have the data to even make an informed policy at this point. So thank you so much for the effort and the work, but know that I'm eager to return to this conversation when we have enough data. Thank you.
We do have conversations. I want you to know that
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I meant,
yeah.
I meant.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I was saying yeah. Well, on our end.
Because I know y'all got stuff.
Yes, we do. We have conversations with folks, like this is the 4th time you've called about this particular property.
Right, because every time they do that, that's
it's time.
Money.
It's time.
That's money. It's time and money. Remember,
Yes.
we are fiscally restrained.
Yes.
So I need all of our time to go towards people.
Whenever
and
I
things they
say
need.
time, staff, anything like that,
It's
I
so
understand
important.
it's coming out of somebody's pocket to pay
That's
for
what,
that.
and
We're
it's
very
coming out of our
responsible
pocket.
to that,
So
yeah.
that's why we have a responsibility to ensure
Absolutely.
that violators are taken care of. And I've just noticed a difference in how we enforce certain things. Some parts of our codes and things are heavily enforced, and then there's others. This isn't a criticism. This is just something I've observed in my short time here. So thank you so much. That was my question and comment.
All right, thanks. Oh, we got a double dip. Although in your case, it's like a 6 dip, but go ahead.
Thanks for pointing that out. So, in the case of a fraternity sorority, what are they referred to, and what are the variations for that?
You'll have to clarify that question.
So, are there room space standards for a fraternity or sorority? Do they have to have a certain amount of square footage?
Yes, I mean, it still falls under the same ICC standards.
So the fact that it used to be sort of a congregate or high density living space doesn't, now that could be a place where they would have perhaps fewer people living in that building.
They could. I mean,
Interesting.
it really depends on the use of the building and what is the occupancy for that use of that building. So there's occupancy standards, right? And then there's use occupancy standards, right? So that's a hard question to answer because I'd have to look at the structure of the building and tell you like what is the use and occupancy for that use of that building, as opposed to like a single family or, you know, that has added a couple new bedrooms in there, and then that's easier to calculate in the IPMC because you look at the chart and you're like, okay, this is great. But we also have use standards that are a little bit different. So
Okay, so then,
but they are going to be held to the minimum standards just like everybody else.
okay, so and so 2 students living in a very small room with a bunk bed.
So very small room would be, that's not a term I'm going to use.
Okay,
I'm going
right.
to say this is a 100 square foot room and you can have 2 occupants in this room.
Okay.
This is a 150 square foot room. You can have 3 occupants in this room. Hey, how big is your dining room? How big is your living room area? Do you have a bathroom on this floor? Is there a bathroom on the adjacent floor? There's no bathroom on either of those floors. That doesn't meet IPMC standards.
Okay.
So you can't do this, that, and this. So there's a lot of, like, it seems like it's kind of easy, but it's not sort of easy. There are other little standards that kind of get tripped along the way. And I was trying to explain that to Carl one day, and he's like, oh my gosh. So he's like, that's very confusing. And I said, it is. And so again, we've been enforcing IPMC standards for quite a while. It tripped us up a little bit when there was also a zoning standard and with families and related occupancies that kind of messed with it more. So it's almost simpler for us to just say, hey, this is the IPMC. Even though it deals with some more calculations and stuff like that, it's from a code compliance mentality, it's easier for us.
Okay. And then is there a video online somewhere that talks someone through what this standard looks like?
Not that I'm aware of. We are, as part of our more community outreach types of behavior that we're reinforcing, our landlord education tools that we'll be putting out in our sessions that we'll have. We have been having them. They kind of fell by the wayside during COVID, and then they started up again, and we'll have those available. We'll also have a tenant version of that, so they can talk to us about and ask questions, and it'll be tutorials and stuff like that for them, so they understand what our standards are. Okay. Beyond just how many people can live in your house. It's like, don't put that drape on top of your ceiling and cover up your smoke alarm, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
All right, so this is everybody's viral video opportunity, is to create a YouTube video that outlines the IPMC requirements. All right, thanks, Jen. There's a lot of questions. I really appreciate all that elucidation.
I'm always here for you guys.
There's a lot of great answers. Thank you. All right, well, let's go to our public hearing. We have 2 people signed up, 1 in person, 1 virtual. Each person will get 3 minutes to speak. Our in-person testifier is Eric Budd.
Hi, Council. Eric Budd. I live in Boulder. Thanks so much for taking up this ordinance tonight. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Boulder's occupancy limits. Kind of familiar. When I first started working to end Boulder's discriminatory occupancy limits in 2014, no person on City Council even wanted to talk about changing them. They were politically untouchable. I want to acknowledge tonight how far we've come. I'm just one of thousands of people who have worked for decades to see this day come. So when I first got involved, I joined a group called BOCHA, which is called the Boulder Community Housing Association, which had the goal of bringing people who were living illegally out of the shadows, such that these occupancy limits didn't evict people, they didn't force people to leave their housing simply because they were unrelated. And it's a cause that's really important. And it's the moral piece of this, I think, is lost in this conversation about building codes, that we're not going to do that anymore. In 2015, over 100 people came to these chambers to speak out against increased enforcement on unrelated people simply living together following the building codes. The organization BOCHA spent 2 years working on an ordinance to allow cooperative housing, which was illegal in the city for decades. We created Bedrooms Are for People, an organization to change the occupancy laws, who in 2020 had to sue the city of Boulder because the city council changed their election rules to keep people from voting on this issue. In 2023, the city council agreed to raise the number of unrelated people who were legally allowed to live together, and that was a step forward. And then last year, the Colorado legislature voted to ensure that no one in the state of Colorado would be discriminated against in housing because their housemates were unrelated. It has been 50 years since the U.S. upheld discriminatory occupancy limits at the Supreme Court. The vote was 8-1 in favor of keeping these discriminatory laws. Thurgood Marshall, the first Black justice to serve on that body, and one of my personal heroes, was the only Supreme Court justice to correctly determine that housing occupancy limits for unrelated people are unconstitutional. And it's my hope that we can fix this injustice nationwide one day. Thank you.
Thank you. Our one virtual testifier is Lynn Siegel.
Mayor, I do not see Lynn online any longer.
Okay. Well, in that case, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the City Council for consideration of the ordinance at hand. I've got Nicole Spear with her hand up.
I wanted to start with a motion, if I may.
Please.
Motion to adopt Ordinance 8651, amending Title I, General Administration, Title IV, Licenses and Permits, Title V, General Offices, Title IX, Land Use Code, and Title X, Structures, I will do it.
Take all the time you need.
BRC 1981 to update residential occupancy standards to ensure conformance with Colorado House Bill 24-1007 concerning residential occupancy limits and setting forth related details.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Nicole, do you want to speak to your motion now or take a minute?
I will take just a second now to say just a few words. It really hasn't sat well with me since I started on council in 2021 that we've been defining occupancy based on a legal definition of family. This is a definition that doesn't fit how a lot of us experience family. I'm so glad this day has come. I know it seems like just a little tiny change to get in compliance with state law, but for a lot of us in community who've been working for this for a while, and for a lot of us who experience the way that this law has held back our ability to determine our own families, tonight really matters.
I really appreciate that the direction that this takes us towards looking at protecting our community strictly around life safety issues, and in that way providing more safety for our community members by not being overly prescriptive about how people live their lives. So I am really excited to see us move forward with this. Thank you.
Anyone else before the vote? I'll just call on myself briefly and just say that Eric referenced the cooperatives discussion, which I was a part of back in 2016 and 2017, and we spent a very long time putting together a very complicated ordinance so that people who were living together, who were unrelated, who had a community that they had formed could do so legally and not get evicted. And I was proud that we got through that process and passed an ordinance to allow those folks to come out of the shadows. But the process was still way too complicated, too expensive, too hard to apply for, too hard to renew. And so it was with with some relief to see those entire code sections of the code being stricken as part of this ordinance, because it was unnecessary to allow people to live in community together. So I'm glad that we now have this much more straightforward approach based on life safety. So looking forward to approving this here tonight. Thanks, everybody. All right, seeing no other hands raised, Elisha, if we could have a roll call, please.
Yes, sir. We'll take the roll call for the item 5A, the ordinance 8651 adoption with Councilmember Spear.
Yes.
Wallach.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts.
Yes.
Councilmember Marquis.
Yes.
And Shuhart.
Yes.
Ordinance 8651 is hereby adopted unanimously.
All right. Well, city staff, thanks so much for putting this together and getting this across the finish line. And thanks to you and those of you in the community who've advocated on this topic for many years. All right. That brings us nearly to the end of our agenda. We have one more item.
Yes, sir. Our last item on our agenda tonight is our item number 8A, matters from the mayor and members of council. It is the nod of 3 to proceed with additional research regarding incentives/programs for housing homeownership.
So, Councilmember Marquis, you brought this forward. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure. I had submitted a CAC, the Council Agenda Committee request, about thinking about ways to create incentives for ownership that might be outside of deed-restricted ownership in the city of Boulder. We have heard some feedback that there are people interested in owning homes for financial predictability and stability, and not only having a rental model for new development within the city. So the staff kindly responded and said that they could do some additional research thinking about incentives for ownership or other ideas. I don't know what they'll come up with. I tried not to be constrained or prescriptive in my request because I'm interested in just thinking about this concept and seeing if we can invite that and maybe get some people to Boulder who are looking for ownership outside of Boulder and commuting in.
Thanks for that. Any questions for Tina or a comment on that before we check and see if there are 3 or more people interested in this? Matt? You're off.
Tina, was your intent for this to be strictly like around multifamily and sort of our larger housing developments, or housing ubiquitously?
It could be any kind of housing, but an example might be, let's say someone was converting a duplex into 2 units. Is there a way that the city could create an incentive, like a permitting incentive or a tax incentive, so that one of the units would be an ownership model, but not a city-owned deed-restricted ownership model? But it could be anything.
Okay. Do you mind if I propose a friendly addition?
Well, the staff only gave me a nod of 3 for what I asked for, but you can.
Oh, I was just thinking about using market forces to drive housing ownership through having either a rental cap or a rent-to-own ratio throughout the city, so we can sort of suppress the speculative rental poaching that occurs and keep homes available for sale.
That is fine to add that, yes.
Thank you.
Does staff feel like that would still be within a nod of 3 kind of framework?
Good evening, Council. Mark Wolf, Assistant City Manager. I can maybe provide just a little.
Oh, your mic just went off.
Little
and
bit
it's
of
being a little
context.
quiet, so maybe speak right into it.
How about now?
That's good.
Okay. I'll provide a little bit of context just before additional things get added to the pile tonight. So, we did respond a bit to the CAC request, to Councilmember Marquis's original request. I'll provide a little bit of that on the record, since I think that was just on the CAC email exchange. One item of note is that we are preparing an IP and information packet item soon that will update council on current home ownership programs. So that will be things like our general efforts towards middle income housing development and our down payment assistance program. So that's kind of current state is currently planned. And then I just wanted to briefly mention, we are engaged with the Bloomberg Philanthropies City Leadership Initiative in an effort to explore innovations in our affordable housing program overall. This partnership may help inform concepts of affordability beyond our current program. That research anticipates examining our current inclusionary housing program, zoning regulations, our overall affordable housing financing structure, and other elements. We anticipate that work to be completed in late summer, which council would receive an update in that August-September window. So that's probably the best opportunity to more comprehensively look at the different options and anything that might imply additional work plan items. So that would be our general response, and then I can respond to more details or phone a friend behind me. We have Brad and Kurt here as well.
No, I appreciate it. I don't think we need a lot more details, but Taisha, you had a follow-up? No. Oh, Nicole did. Sorry. Thanks for helping. No worries.
Yeah, I just had a couple of other questions. Is there a way that this fits at all into the comprehensive plan discussions or anything that we're having coming up there, or do you really see it as the Bloomberg is the best opportunity?
That's a good question, Councilmember, and Brad will kick me if I'm wrong on this. I think the Bloomberg work will be instructive and is good timing in advance of the comp plan update. So we do anticipate utilizing the research, any lessons learned from that initiative, being able to pull that into our comp plan work. Obviously, it'll depend a bit on how community comes back on some of the areas of focus and ultimately the policy areas that you all and the four bodies will explore as a part of the update. But surely, middle income and flexibility in our affordable housing program could be on the list of things during the comp plan update.
And then the other question that I had around it, so back at the retreat, which was almost a year ago now, I had asked about an assessment of the current affordable homeownership program, and there was a survey kind of going on. Does that fit into this at all?
It does. That is with the first item I mentioned with the update on our existing programs. That's likely, if that doesn't include additional research, that's likely to come soon to council.
Okay, cool. And then I'm not sure if you said it. I apologize. I didn't get it explicitly. But what's the trade-off? I mean, since we're talking not of three, there's got to be a trade-off. So what is that here?
If council would like additional research beyond the Bloomberg initiative or that IP, we think there's some limited ability to look at some peer city research. What are other cities doing in this space that could be added to the IP? It'll likely delay the IP about 2 months. That would be the impact there. If it's beyond that, I think we'd need a little bit more back and forth just because the same staff that are working on and involved in the Bloomberg project would be pulled into this effort. So we would need to think about that a little bit more.
Thank you. I had a question about the scope of that Bloomberg component, because I'm seeing a possibility where there may be some opportunities to align council interests with staff interests. And so curious if there's an opportunity to visit the scope, because I don't, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll point out Mayor Brockett and Chris Meschuk are both involved in that initiative. So I invite either of them to speak to that question on scope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it. And I think, Taisha, you ask a really good question. And the research and the kind of problem frame that we're looking at as a part of this is pretty broad. And we're following a bit of like it's an innovation kind of rubric and structure that is provided as a part of the program. I'd be happy to have a direct conversation with you to just make sure that whatever is on your mind in terms of kind of interest areas, to make sure that those are covered. But we're right now, it's really looking at examining housing in Boulder and attainable housing for all. Right. And with that kind of future vision that we want to be able to have a community that has housing opportunities for all. Right. But would love to dig into the details a little bit with you if there's something specific.
Well, and it's not just me. I think it's, and I obviously have high regard for our mayor and you're still two people. not representative of our whole community. And so I just am hopeful that we could have a broader conversation around just what that, this actually is, this goes to a pattern that I'd seen before that I've mentioned about sometimes the scope of the research when it's done doesn't actually meet the needs of the current council members. And so this is a request that I'm having to try and help mitigate that on the front end. I'm imagining this is a very expensive project. And so I would love to just make sure that we have a scope that we can all feel really good about, because Tina's request, in my opinion, fits perfectly within that scope, but I don't even know what that scope is. And so the fact that we have to even hold this conversation when, you know, I guess what I'm asking is, can we revisit how we do research and evaluation so that there's more collective agreement on what it is on the research questions and the design. So I appreciate the one-on-one, but I just don't know how efficient that would be. And I care to know what all of my colleagues have to say on that, because each of us brings something different. We have a different perspective, different expertise. And so I think we could benefit greatly. The quality of the research will benefit greatly by opening the scope of who's making decision during this really critical step on design. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Taisha. And we should, it's a good point about getting a little bit more, talking about a little bit more kind of as a body. So thanks for raising the question. I'll just note that the idea is very much to be part of the comprehensive plan process, so that rather than being kind of a separate initiative or work plan item, that it being about a matter I think that we all care about, about the availability and attainability of housing leading into the comp plan process. And they actually are providing a great deal of, those entities are providing resources to us rather than vice versa. But all fair points. Yeah.
So just circle back. I know I offered a friendly amendment that was certainly accepted by Tina, but puts onus on staff. If that's not the appropriate place for it, I just want to know, where is this? Is it the comp plan? Is it this Bloomberg thing that is the appropriate slot for an idea like the one I presented, and perhaps others from colleagues, to be put on the table for vetting and thorough? So I just want to kind of know, like, where and when is that venue, so I can I don't need to then harp on amendments, and I can be cool and come prepared when that moment comes.
Yeah, and Chris, you can chime in here as well. My reaction to that would be, yes, it's this Bloomberg project and bringing the conclusions, a summary from that work to council in that August-September window as we've been planning. Certainly if council's interested in adding a work plan item beyond addressing those items within the comp plan process, that's a different conversation. But I think then at that point in August, September, you would have the fuller picture of the research accomplished within the confines of the project at that time.
Understand. So having an idea for something to explore, we're waiting on this Bloomberg thing to determine what we should explore, and whether or not an idea fits into that envelope or not is to be determined sometime in August. Is that what I'm hearing?
You want to help?
Again, I'm just trying to find out when, because if it's wait and then there's scope and there's analysis, then our input is then already, it's irrelevant because the work has already been done, versus, hey, love for you to explore this thing, and if it's dead on arrival, tell us that. And if it's got some tendrils, then we might know that in the resulting sort of plan that comes in August. So I'm just trying to know where does an idea or concept that we may or may not know as part of this be appropriately inserted or brought to the table?
Yeah, you're right. There's a little bit of chicken and egg here that I get where you're going. In the innovation project that we're doing around affordable housing, there's no the way the project works and the kind of framework that they have us using. There are no preconceived specific approaches that we are specifically trying to study at this time. It's a open-ended problem statement, and then we're going through an interview process to dig into those areas. there will be a phase where we start to then explore and kind of dig into some hypotheses. So it might fit there. And the reason I'm hesitating is just because we haven't gotten to that stage yet. So I'd be happy to hear more on it, because that way we can see if it fits in there. And the idea of all of this kind of research, as Mark described, is going to be able to feed into then the policy conversations at the comp plan. That's how the timing actually works out really perfectly. So if you're okay with it, what I'd say is a bit of the same thing I said to Taisha, which is I'd love to have a one-on-one conversation on it to dig in a little bit more. And if it doesn't fit, I'll be happy to be honest and tell you that.
I got Lauren. We're getting all kinds of interest here in what we're talking about. I got Lauren, I got Tina, I got Taisha, and I will just note that what you're talking about in terms of the innovation group, this is a cross-departmental staff team. It does not involve me or other council members, right? That our subject matter experts in city staff are digging into these research items and seeing, what they might bring back to us to vet.
Thank you for that clarification. It does feel like it would be nice to have a touch point with council before the findings of this are just presented to us. I am not involved enough to understand what that might be, but as we think about what areas it makes sense to delve really deeply into, it does seem like there would be a political aspect of that it would be important to consider. I do think that is separate, though, a little bit from Tina's request, and is a conversation I would be happy to participate in offline.
Great.
One suggestion to that council member, just for the Bloomberg project itself, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong here, because we'll be having an upcoming study session on the focus areas of the comp plan, we can make sure to bring a little bit more information on the timing and the implications of the project as it relates to the policy areas.
That sounds like a great idea, because clearly there's some justified interest in this topic, right? But we also want to move forward with our checking in on the knot of three. Yep. So, Tina.
Yeah, and just colleagues, my original CAC request was first additional thoughts about incentives around affordability. And my second request was just around ownership, but not only in the context of affordability. So the response for the affordability piece was the Bloomberg project. The ownership piece outside of deed restricted or the actual intentional affordable housing, that's what the knot of three is for. And so I just want to make it clear that that's what I'm looking to add, is just the ownership piece onto that general discussion.
I guess where I'm going with this is, like, I want to have the discussion. I just don't know where it is, and I don't want to add on something. So that's where I feel terrible at the idea of saying no to something I would want, but I'm saying no to adding on. I'm saying yes to integrating into existing things. So yeah, I'm just, I don't even know how to respond, but I really love the alternative option that you're bringing, where that we can have that conversation and make sure that component is in there, is what I'm hearing. So thank you.
And I think I've gotten a little bit lost on where we are. So I'm just going to try to summarize a little bit what I think we might be talking about. So I think what I heard you say, Mark, is that we could have some of what Tina's asking about in an information packet in a couple of months. If we wanted to add on some more work to that, to say, look at best practices in other cities and things like that, that would add a couple more months to that information packet and where it would take us. There may be some options for talking about some of this during the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan discussions. Did I summarize that kind of effectively?
That's correct. So the additional home ownership best practices options that exist in the universe, we can add that to the IP. It would likely delay that. We're thinking about 2 months. So I think, and Kurt can correct me if I'm wrong, that might be in the June window that you would receive that IP then.
But it wouldn't, to get that IP without the kind of other city research.
Yep.
That we can still do at no other cost to other work.
Correct. You would, if you don't add the additional research, that would come to you sooner. So it's just your decision on just that piece is whether or not you're comfortable with the delay of the IP so that we can conduct that additional research.
And Tina, can I ask you a question? Would you clarify which of those you're kind of asking for? Of like, is this kind of for like that additional work for the IP?
Right. So for me, so my interest is in seeing if there are ways that we can allow people to own their home in Boulder. And it sounds to me the way it is, but it's to Taisha's point, it's a little hard to assess it entirely, but it sounds like we may not get that in this next iteration. And that is a priority for me. So, but the nod of 3 is it's not necessarily a priority for all, and that's 100% okay. That's why we're all here. And the second thing is I'm sort of hearing that there's going to be a touch point, and I'm wondering if that's an additional meeting or is that already scheduled?
Already scheduled.
For which piece? Now you lost me.
The
For the
BVCP.
The BVCP
Well, that's just the
updates,
BVCP.
yes.
It's not around the Bloomberg and the housing piece. It's just
So a BVCP update is scheduled for May, a joint study session late May. And then the Bloomberg project, we don't have scheduled, but anticipate that to be scheduled in August, September, that time frame for council.
Okay.
So two different discussions.
But I understood you to say that you could touch on it in
We
the
could
May.
yes, absolutely. As
So
it
that we-
relates to the
yes.
BVCP, we can touch on the Bloomberg work during that May piece, essentially a status update.
Right. That's
Yes.
what we were looking for
Yes.
in the May piece. Okay. We're over our 15 minutes for this, but real quick, Taisha and Mark, please.
I actually just realized that we have more people who can help with the research than the people in our city, and that is National League of Cities. We can make these types of requests, especially if we're talking about comps and what other cities are doing. We pay for that membership. So I'm just curious if that's another alternative to maybe be able to get some of the home ownership. I know they did a whole accelerator around home ownership. And so I'm wondering if we can actually just meet with them and gather and see and assess and ask them. Again, we pay for this. Nothing we get is free. So I just wanted to offer that as another alternative. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, just very briefly, I'm happy to be supportive of any research we can do on this subject, but I'd like to filter all of these possibilities and suggestions through the particular conditions of Boulder, which is land here is $2.5 to $3 million an acre, and the hard costs of construction are $400 to $500 per square foot. That may have a major impact on the viability of anything we come up with, and we need to look at it in real world terms. What Dubuque does is not going to be the same thing that we do because they have different costs. And if we can do this research and keep our particular conditions in mind, I'm entirely supportive.
Thanks for that. All right. Well, I'm going to now see if we have the nod of 3. I'm going to ask for a show of hands rather than nodding because it's hard to see nods. All those in favor of Tina's request for a nod of 3, hold your hand up. Okay, looks like I got unanimous. So the nodding has happened. Thanks for talking all of that through. Okay, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Before I gavel its close, I just thought I'd mention, see a number of CU students in the audience. Thanks for joining us here tonight. It's great to have you here. And you may be shocked to know that this is, we're ending very early for a city council meeting. Yeah. Yes, so, but we do now, if you did want to refer back to public comment, this would be your alternative. Our opportunity. Opportunity.
Didn't feel that way.
Yep, no. Absolutely. We got our 2 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I just wanted to speak to the multi-use path and the bike theft and just bike security on those bike paths. And specifically the signage. Like, I didn't even know there was a speed limit on the bike path. I mean, I'm not even kidding. And so if I don't know and I'm on the thing, how we can't hold people to standards that they don't know. So, I think the signage is, and I also am really I want to honor the conversation around engineering versus enforcement, and how much are we actually spending on enforcement, and what does that look like? I actually talked about the need to, or recommendation around having a stronger relationship with our hospitals so that we can get more information on some of the injuries as well that are happening. Just am eager to hear more. So thank you for continuing to bring that to the table. I also wanted to lift up the rooftop solar, and it is my understanding that staff made a decision based on our policy priorities around local control, and I understand that. However, we also have other policies around climate resilience, and we cannot be an A student in a failed group assignment. And so we need to do everything we can to ensure that clean, renewable energy is available throughout the state and not just in the city of Boulder. I'm hopeful that we can revisit that decision, and I look forward to hearing what the process is to have a more robust discussion as a council around that. Illegal camping, thank you very much. Thank you for continuing to lift that up. I think there's a variety of different issues around that, but I just want to lift up that we heard you and continue to work in that area. How am I doing on my time? I don't see the timer. Did it end?
You got maybe 30, 45 seconds.
All right, well, I need, holler at your girl. Where my stuff at? Proportional representation, that was also really interesting, and if that person can send us an email, that would be wonderful. And I also just want to lift up an appreciation for a joint declaration. I saw the No Other Lands documentary last night at the dairy. If you have not, please go ahead and see that. But I just, again, am grateful for community interest in revisiting a joint declaration. I have significant concerns around a separate but equal hate declaration. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Mark?
I'll get it within 2 minutes. 3 comments. One, we've had, I think, an increasing number of people expressing to us frustrations with enforcement of one thing or another. And it leads me to wonder if we are insufficiently staffed to provide adequate enforcement in a number of areas. And I'm beginning to think that's something we ought to look at over time because the number of complaints seems to grow. My second comment is addressed to the gentleman who basically attacked this council for defects of behavior with respect to anti-Semitism. And I want to point out that first, we have declined the opportunity to be involved in Middle East politics, despite vociferous efforts to compel us to do so. A majority of the members of this council have spoken up against expressions of anti-Semitism in this room, and many of us have expressed those views publicly and on various occasions. I think that was an unfair criticism. And lastly, one speaker claimed that we're reducing freedom of speech for those who support Palestine. I suggest that the largest number of speakers in tonight's open comment were people who were dealing with the issue of Palestine. So I'm a little curious as to how that constitutes a reduction of freedom of speech. And I think that's an unfair criticism as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Ryan, you got
Thanks. I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Mike Clark, who spoke on the Arapahoe Foothill Parkway red light matter. Thanks, Chris, for clarifying that is one of the intersections where we do have automated controls now. My understanding is that as operational, drivers being ticketed. That's not the case. I guess I would ask if we can just double check that that's happening. That is one of, I think, 24 placements that this council approved based on staff data-driven work in December of 2023. And staff is doing an incredible amount of work to roll this out citywide, and it includes a lot of coordination with CDOT, because both of those roads, plus many others, are CDOT roads. So I want to thank staff for their work to do that, and we can't get them all done quick enough and start talking about the next the next round as far as I'm concerned. So I mainly just wanted to make sure that that's known, and thank staff for their work to get that done.
All right, thanks. All right, seeing no other hands raised, and we're at the end of our agenda, I will go ahead and gavel this closed here at 8:03 p.m. Good night, everybody. Thank you.